Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 309 of the MTGGoldfish podcast. I'm Zeth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have the full crew here this holiday week, starting with the owner of MTGGoldfish, Richard. How's it going, Richard? Happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays, Seth. I'm doing well. What's going on?
I mean, not a whole lot. We're kind of in a dead spot in the Magic calendar. Wizards, everyone takes off during the holidays, so we don't get official Wizards news. We're waiting for Kaldheim spoilers. But we actually have a pretty interesting, fun, special topic to wrap up our last podcast of the year with today. But before we get into all that, we got another co-host in Krim. Happy holidays, Krim. How are you today?
I'm good. Pretty excited for all things going on today's episode because, well, yeah. Why don't you lead us into it?
Okay, so what are we doing for our podcast today? And we decided, since it's kind of a slow week without a lot of Magic news, we're going to do something a little bit different. And we are going to make, for this week, Richard the host of the podcast. And we're going to dedicate the entire cast to going back through our standard spoiler predictions of the past year. So, as you probably know, every time there's a new set, Krim and I do top 10 videos where we talk about the 10 cards we think are going to be best for various formats. So today, we're focusing on standard, and we're starting with Throne of Eldraine, the earliest set that's still standard legal, going all the way up through Zendikar Rising. And for each set, we have some clips from when we initially did the videos and podcasts that Richard's going to play and kind of host and walk us through it. And we're going to talk about, for each set, the pick that we got most right, I guess you would say, our best pick, our worst pick, so a card that we put on our top 10 list that probably didn't deserve to be in our top 10 list with the benefit of hindsight, and then an omission, our biggest omission from the list. What was a card that we definitely should have had on our top 10 list, now that we can look back and see how standard shook out, but didn't have on our top 10 list at the time? So we're going to kind of investigate our good and our bad spoiler predictions from the past year with Richard guiding us through. But before we jump it over to Richard, we have a sponsor today, and our show today is brought to you by the fine folks over at Card Conduit. And if you've ever struggled with selling your Magic cards, just the amount of time it takes to sort everything, typing them into various websites, packing them up, shipping them, going to the post office, all that stuff, it's a big hassle. Well, Card Conduit, they're the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. And if you're looking to avoid all those hassles I was talking about and all the time it takes to sell your cards, this new service from the folks over at Card Hoarder will sort, grade, and sell your Magic cards for you. And once your shipment is processed, you'll get the proceeds minus their fee. And right now, you can get a 10% discount by going over to cardconduit.com/goldfish. So thank you to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And Richard, I'm going to bounce it over to you. Why don't you guide us through the good, the bad, the ugly of our spoiler predictions? One thing I will say, I'm not really sure what's on our list. Krim definitely doesn't know. I helped our editor, Nidashuk, put together the list a little bit, but I don't actually know what ended up. So most of this list is done by other people. So our good and our bad predictions were not judged by us necessarily, but kind of an independent outside observer. And it's going to be a surprise, I think, to both of us to see what we got right, what we got wrong, and what shows up on the list. So Richard, take it away. Guide us through the good, the bad, and ugly of our 2020 spoiler predictions.
I just want to say before we go into that, no matter whatever I put Oko at, I was already wrong. It needs to be higher.
All right. Fear not, guys. The internet is a kind and loving place where in the hundreds of hours of content we create every year, it's recorded in the history of time forever and archived for our editor to pull up and for us to review. So thanks to our editor for pulling out the clips. But we're going to start with Eldraine. Technically, 2019, but it is part of our current standard. So we will start with our biggest hit, and probably the biggest hit of every format and everybody. Let's play the clip.
Number 8 on our list, we have Planeswalker number 1, Oko, Thief of the Crowns. And this is a card for me. When I first read, this was, I think, one of the first cards, maybe the first card that was spoiled from the set. When I first read it, I was like, oh, what's a food? Is that going to be good? I don't know about all these abilities. But now that we see the full set and the support for food and some of the synergies of Oku, it's been steadily creeping up my list of cards that I'm really excited for Throne of Eldraine Standard. But what do you think about this one, Grim?
Not getting enough attention.
like, I think it's not getting enough praise, going into, like, the release here. Imagine this on turn 2 with the goose.
Oh, that's even better. So yeah, I almost think we might have Oku underrated, if anything, on this list. Like, seeing it number 8, like, at first it wasn't on my list at all. Now we got it on number 8, and when we look back on this, it might be that we're actually underrating it, having it number 8, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, number 8, you guys. Number 8, and we know this is the past because Seth doesn't even know the name of infamous planeswalker. It's Oku. He hasn't been traumatized by the Thief of Crowns yet. So Oku at number 8.
Way to go, Seth. You broke the...
How do I mispronounce a 3-letter word? That is impressive even for my standards of mispronunciations. I mean, on one hand, obviously Oko should have been number 1 on the list. Like, with the benefit of hindsight, I think it's clearly the number 1 card, without a shadow of a doubt. Probably the number 1 card of the entire past year of Magic. On the other hand, you specifically, Krim, said you thought we were maybe even underrating it. So I feel like, even though we should have had it higher, we were at least heading in the direction of it being even better than our number 8 ranking.
I honestly feel like that card should just... I mean, I don't think I had it my number 1. But I definitely thought it would have been in my top 5. And so like, and like, just because like I guess I was right. Turns out that did end up happening. Look at that. Goose into the Oko on 2. The goose went loose and then so did Oko. Like, it was absolutely...
The once upon a time to make sure you get the goose. I think this is from a standard video. Little did we know that Oko would go on to dominate literally every other format in Magic, all the way back to Vintage, with even the infamous Black Lotus Elk getting in there. So yeah, I think just everyone we knew the card was strong, but we didn't know how strong, and we didn't know the destruction it would lay to all the formats in
Magic. Yeah, like, it's funny because even hearing it back now, I still think I underrated it.
Even after he's banned, watch out. You might pop up.
I'm still ready. I'm still playing around it out of the sideboard. The card is absolutely nuts.
I think, though, no matter what we said, we'd be underrating it. Unless we literally went on our spoiler videos and said this is the greatest Magic card in the entire history of the game, which would be a pretty bold statement for any card during spoiler season. Like, unless we went that far, we'd be underrating it by default, because that's how good Oko turned out.
I'm gonna just say it now. If there's a new Planeswalker that relies on some kind of alternate, like, resource in the game, best card of the game. And actually, no. Specifically, Oko is just, It's got it, unless we said this is just straight up the best card ever printed. Yeah, it was definitely underrated. I agree with that.
All right. Let's move on to the next card.
Okay, so as we know, the entire Knights tribe is absurdly pushed this set.
Is Circle of Loyalty,
we all agree on that. So I think the Circle of Loyalty is just absurdly powerful.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree there. And kind of like what we were talking about with Wildborn Preserver, Knights, very aggressive tribe. The risk is you run out of cards. So this feels like a card that's just built to be very strong in Knights, and Knights feel like a tribe to me that Wizards wanted to make sure would be standard playable. If you just read the list of Knights, I can't imagine that there's not a competitive Knight deck coming out of Throne of Eldraine.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Hold. Technically, that is true.
Rakdos Knights running 0 Circle of Loyalties.
If we don't talk about what card we were actually talking about, it is true, right? I mean, Rakdos Knights existed. Mardu Knights, maybe not as much.
Yeah, I think our miss here, at least for me, is not so much Circle of Loyalty itself, which if I just read Circle of Loyalty, it still seems like a really good card for a Knight deck. Like, the problem is, I think I thought Knights as a tribe were going to be better than they ended up being. Yes, we did see a little bit of, like, Rakdos Knights here and there. Have not seen really any Circle of Loyalties, though, show up in Standard, so this was a pretty big miss, I guess. And it's kind of funny because I don't have our list in front of us from Throne of Eldraine at the moment, but I'm guessing we probably didn't have the Great Henge on our standard list, and we might not have had Embercleave on our standard list, so somehow we managed to pick like the least playable of one of the most playable cycles from the entire set, but we somehow honed in on the Circle of Loyalty over the actual busted cards.
We had a pretty good chance, right, of landing on one of the playable ones, but we threw some darts and entirely missed.
You didn't account for the fact that Circle of Loyalty is just an elk. It really does nothing. And yeah, if Oko was number 8, I'm pretty sure Circle of Loyalty was higher than that. So, let's move on to omissions.
Next on our list, speaking of weird cards, we have Embercleave. It's really difficult to evaluate. If you have 4 attacking creatures and one of those creatures is big, then Embercleave is probably pretty good. You cast it for 2 mana, it's Temur Battle Rage. That was a card that saw play in Standard, still see play in Modern with Death Shadow. On the other hand, that's kind of a specific condition. You need to have a lot of creatures on the battlefield, because if you're casting this for like 6 mana, much less exciting. Even 5 or 4 mana, again, not that exciting. So it's going to take some work to find a deck for Embercleave to really fit into. On the other hand, maybe something just like Gruul stuff. This feels like a combat trick, a pump spell. It's a little weird that it's mythic. Maybe we'll see more equipment support in Throne of Eldraine than we've gotten so far. Maybe it's still coming down the pike. So overall, I really have literally no idea how to evaluate this card. I could see it be a scary combo piece that maybe ends the game with Crackling Drakes or Prowess creatures, similar to Temur Battle Rage in Modern, or when it was in Standard, or I could see it being just absolutely unplayable, no one does anything with it, maybe it shows up in a Commander deck once in a while.
Maybe it shows up in a Commander deck. This was taken from a daily spoiler because it was so disrespected. It did not make your top 10 Standard card list.
Yeah, that's a pretty big miss. I guess in my defense, I did mention Gruul stuff, which is a way that Embercleave has seen a lot of play. So there's a little bit of rightness in there. But honestly, even with how busted Throne of Eldraine ended up being, I think looking back on it, it would definitely deserve to be in the top 10 and probably like in the top 5, even considering the amount of cards, the Okos and so forth that ended up getting banned from the set. Like Embercleave ended up being essentially a format defining Standard card, and we didn't even manage to get it in our top 10 list at all, which is definitely a huge miss.
Yeah. Huge miss on our part there. I mean, I don't even think I had on my like honorary mentions.
I wonder though if it's because me and you, Krim, like you're kind of the control player, I'm the Dirtle player. Like maybe it's more that we just underestimate it because it's like such an aggro card and kind of outside of our wheelhouse. Do you think that plays into it? Like just our own personal biases and play styles?
Yeah, and on top of that, you gotta remember, we came from a format where aggro was kind of a joke, right?
And,
like, you couldn't play aggro.
And because, it's equipment, and we've come out of a decade where equipment has been a joke. So it was very hard for me to believe, like, an equipment was going to be a dominant card in Standard, just because Wizard had been so conservative, all the way back to New Phyrexia, since they really printed good, let alone format-defining equipment cards. So it was pretty easy for me personally to write it off just based on that. Like, oh, it's an equipment. Wizards doesn't print good equipment anymore. So this must, not actually be that good.
Correct. I mean, I'm right there with you. So yeah, definitely blinded by, first off, my own play style and from like the way, the format was. So not surprised. I mean, the idea of like, actually having creatures attack and the combat step, well, I mean, I guess does the combat step matter because of that card? I mean, that card blanks the combat step, right?
These excuses, Krim, you should be envisioning dying to Embercleave. You're like, my Planeswalker's getting cleaved left and right. How can I deal with this instant speed equipment coming down? I have to kill before combat.
Teferi was legal. Teferi was legal. Remember that.
Teferi. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's Eldraine in a nutshell. Like, I think Embercleave could be one of the best cards in Eldraine because of longevity. Everything else is banned. It is still legal, so maybe it just takes the crown for being most played.
It wins by default.
Yeah, but yeah, lots of powerful cards from Eldraine. I'm actually curious now. I want to pull up the top 10 list afterwards and see how many staples were in there, because little did we know that Eldraine would go on to dominate Standard, to basically to this very day. All right. Next up, we are moving to the land of Godzilla with Ikoria. And let's see what you guys had to say about Ikoria.
So we have another enchantment, but this one, the floor is much higher, I would say. It's really hard for this one to go wrong thanks to cycling, and that is Shark Typhoon. So, Krim, where are you Sharknadoing in Standard?
Whatever deck that can cast this, I think, in blue, it's so good. Like, this feels like it's good at all phases of the game.
Yeah, I think it's that flexibility is really what makes this card. There are going to be games where it just sits on the battlefield and it's insane. There's going to be games where you just cycle it for like 4 mana or 5 mana and make a instant speed blocker to eat an attacker or make a threat to attack down a planeswalker or whatever. It's really hard for it to be bad. I mean, even the floor of just 2 mana cycle it, not even get a shark, it's not really the end of the world. Like, well, a lot of cards are 2 mana cycling. So I feel like Shark Typhoon has potential kind of across archetypes outside of aggro. Like control decks can play it as a finisher. You have like the combo-y, wilderness reclamation decks that can play it. There's a lot of places that this card can show up, and the flexibility just really makes it possible.
Correct.
Does this count? Seth seems to believe this card will be on the battlefield doing things.
Okay, when I say cast, I meant cycle or do anything with it. because it like you could do whatever, right? You could cast it, you can cycle it like whatever, a decree of justice. Like this is just, I mean, it's still true and it holds up to this day. And at that point we had wilderness reclamation, so why not make some big shark tokens? Actually, yeah, in that exact clip, I mentioned Wilderness Rec because of that, right? Like, it's such a good card.
Those were scary times with Wilderness Rec.
I think we did pretty well with that one. We ended up in our combined list. We had Shark Typhoon at number 4, which, if anything, we probably were actually underrating it. I think looking back on Ikoria, it might actually it's probably the number 1 card, honestly, out of the set as far as how much play it's seen and how impactful it's been. So I feel like, though, we definitely get credit for that one because that was a card that did end up being, a staple of Standard and other formats as well. So I feel pretty good about that prediction.
I'm going to discredit myself right now because I know for a fact I left a good amount of companions off the list. So any brownie points I made off this, I need it so it can pad the stat.
All right.
I think it gets worse.
We'll get there. Yeah, the top list should be filled with companions, pre-nerf companions. But hold on, we're getting there. Let's play the next clip here.
I still am struggling to understand why this card was printed. Titan's Nest, the Sultai member of the enchantment cycle, can potentially add a little bit of mana, let's say. Krim, what are you doing with Titan's Nest in Standard?
I mean, I don't know what I can't do. Every time we've had a delve card, it's been absurdly broken. I just don't know what else we could really talk about. I mean, like the ability to just add that free mana is insane. Absolutely absurd.
The value is so immense once it gets going. So I feel like this card really frightens me. Out of all the cards on the list that we talked about today, many of them are very good, and I expect them to see a lot of play. This is a card that I have a little bit of fear could be actually like broken in Standard. If there's a card that we're all like, oh my god, I wish they didn't print this, why do I gotta play against it again? I think Titan's Nest is the most likely card for Standard on the list.
In Standard, I think this is just absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, I think it definitely deserves to come in at the top of our best Ikoria cards for Standard list.
Agreed.
Oh, the best Ikoria card, Titan's Nest.
Okay, so let me, in my defense, you gotta remember where we were at when Ikoria came out. We were in a time where mana doublers were dominating Standard, and we had Wilderness Rack, and we had Fires of Invention, we had Nissa, we had all these cards. So at the time, I was very sensitive to anything that looked like it would come down for 4 mana and immediately add a ton of mana. So I think that's why I was so high on and scared of Titan's Nest. Obviously, in hindsight, that fear was very unfounded for probably a bunch of different reasons. Like Titan Nest, it does have big restrictions. It is really hard to play on Magic Arena without timing out. So I think that actually does play into it a little bit as well. And plus, we have like Uro, which is eating away your graveyard, and Kroxa, which is eating away your graveyard. So if you're going to spike cards from your graveyard, we just had better things to do than Titan's Nesting. So I think there were some legitimate reasons I was like high on it and scared of it at the time, but boy, is that like a laughably bad number one card. And I believe that we each had that on our individual lists at number one too. So it's not even a case where like one of us really pushed for it and the other one was against it. I think we were both like, yeah, this is a number one card. Duh, obviously.
It was a way to anything that like Seth had mentioned that kind of cheats on resources and helps accelerate anything. Of course. That's the main thing I hate, except this one, I guess, doesn't do anything upon immediately hitting the board. Okay. All right. But I just, at that time, anything that's cheating on resources, come on, right? We had to deal with that already.
Yeah. I think it just did a lot of nothing when we already had ways to cheat on resources in the format.
Yeah.
And ways that cheat on resources that were their own win condition too, right? So
yeah.
So yeah, Titan's Nest, number one card from Ikoria. All right.
So, is there any chance that we get redeemed before it rotates, Crib? Like, do you think? Is there any chance we end up? Yeah, I was thinking that too. We're probably just dead in the water on this one. We're not going to be saved.
I wish I could like slightly lie about it. Well, you know, no.
They literally print dredge cards.
Dredge has got a new toy.
Next up, we have some companions. We have Lurrus of the Dream Den.
I only like this in like modern. Like if it's gonna get played, I think it's something in modern, but in standard, I don't know how you could play a deck.
I don't think we have enough permanence in standard.
I think in standard this card's good not as a companion.
Is there even a companion that you would play in constructed like just because of its companion? Like can we make any of them work?
How about Yorion?
I think this is the best companion. This one, I think this is the easiest one to play. I feel like playing all the other companions make you not play cards that your deck really wants. This just makes you play more cards. So you get to play everything you want. Yes, you're going to lose a little bit of consistency, but you gain an 8-card starting hand, essentially.
You guys tripping. This card's terrible. In standard, like, the card pulls all that deep. You can't pat. Like, you can throw in more ops and stuff, but they're not free, right? They cost mana. You can't like just pad your deck out infinitely. So I actually think this is terrible. Like,
I think the power of having an extra card in your starting hand is something people haven't grasped. I think it would definitely be worth it for a whole bunch of decks and a lot of other companions as well. Like, that's a huge shift in the percentage from exactly one additional card than your opponent has.
But in standard, and at least with London Mulligans and everything, I mean, we've already seen in like the past year that card advantage doesn't necessarily always win the games anymore, right?
Are you gaining more than you're losing? That's where it becomes really hard to figure out without having actually played the card.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because all of these weird decks, I think Sam Black called this like the best card or whatever. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Next up, we have...
All right, editor betrayed me. I am in this list.
Seth trying to leave us.
So good.
Seth tried his hardest to actually put forth the strengths of companion, and me and Krim were like, nah, what are you talking about?
You guys be tripping, I think was the exact quote.
Yeah. You hear the doubt.
Richard
Like, even Sam Black thinks this is good. Like, come on, Sam.
Richard slipped on his sunglasses. Nah, you're tripping.
Companions dominated every format to the point where they're like, we just need to change the whole mechanic. That's how bad this was. That extra card is worth a lot. A very, 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 very large amount that everyone updated their vintage decks and legacy decks and modern decks and standard decks to just play these cards.
I feel a little good that I was the one that was trying to convince people that companions were better than they thought, but at the same time, like, I don't even think I was high enough on them. Even I, like, probably didn't go far enough, because I was kind of at the point where, like, oh yeah, I think Yarion's good. I think Loris is especially good in older formats, but really, Abash, Garuda, are you really going to play all evens or all odds in your decks? And even those companions that look like the bad ones, the ones that would be really hard to build around, ended up being, like, legitimate top tier cards, all the way back to, like, Legacy. Abash still sees playing Modern, even after the nerfing. So even though I was, like, pushing for them to be better, or for you guys to think they were better than you want to give them credit for, I think I still was underestimating them at that point.
I mean, I had them so low. I was,
I wish we're only doing standard, but I kind of wish that we were doing modern, because I'm pretty sure you literally laughed at me for having Yarion at like number 2 or something. Like, I think you literally laughed when I said it in the video. You're like,
yeah. Because at that point, I remember you were like pushing for Yorion no matter what on like the format. You're like, Yorion. I'm like, there's no way an 80 card deck would make sense. I will humbly take that L. And
it still blows my mind that Yorion is good. Like, I still don't even grasp it to this day, even though I've been destroyed by it many times, that there are enough good cards in all the formats, standard especially, that there's enough depth to the card pool that you can actually blow up your deck to that deck size and still have it be like a top tier deck. It's like something really hard for me to grasp. I'm always like, only play 40 cards in limited, never play 41, right? Like, if you play 41, you've given up on life, right? Like,
literally last night I went up to 44. Not even it wasn't even like yesterday. This was like 6 hours ago when I ended my stream. What's the 44 card special? Is that even that bad?
How much of that do you think is because of like 2019, 2020 design? Like, do you think if Yarion
100%.
was printed in the same form like 5 or 10 years ago, do you think it would still be as impactful? Or do you think it's because we get so many powerful cards these days, you can build an 80 card deck and have it work?
I think it is definitely that, right? When you think about how powerful standard has become, yeah, not surprised that you can build an 80 card deck. And you know what? Turns out you can just load it up with ops and things like that. Cause yeah, like Omen of the Sea, like all of that, like all the omens ended up being a lot better than, I for sure thought they were. So like, yeah, Yorion, no surprise. I mean, 80 cards when all of it's just pure action. Like, sure, why not?
All right.
Companions.
So, oh no, I went out of order. I missed. I got my list sorted out of order. There was a set that we missed in between that we all forgot about. Theros Beyond Death. So let's see what you guys had. We'll jump back to the past some more and see what you guys had to say about Theros Beyond Death.
Whoa, Strider. This card, when I first saw it, I was super excited. It has been quite a while since we've had a repeatable free sack outlet in Standard. We've had sack outlets, we've had good sack outlets, but we haven't really had the sits on the battlefield, you can sacrifice your entire board at will, like Nantucko Husk type of sacrifice outlet. And we're in a Standard where aristocrats are already seeing play. We got Mayhem Devils, we got Cat Ovens, we got Core Vault, so there's already like built-in synergies for this card. So I'm really excited about this card. I don't know exactly where it fits immediately, but I would bet you that someone like Sam Black is gonna like build some busted standard deck with this card and everyone's gonna be playing it a couple months from now. So I will say, Woe Strider was number 5 on our Theros Beyond Death list. Our number 1 and number 2 cards were Uro and Karaxa, and those were obviously good picks, but we decided not to go with that as our biggest hit from the set because they were so obvious, and we don't really need to say more about Uro when Woe Strider was not as obvious, I don't think, at the time that it was going to be a number 1 card, and it definitely ended up being a legitimate top tier standard card. I mean, to the point where we had Sacrifice deck being targeted with bannings, with Cauldron Familiar getting banned, and like Jund Sacrifice being the best deck in the format. So I think we nailed that one, Krim.
Yeah, because I mean, history also really helped with that, right? Anytime there's been a free sack outlet, it's been good.
And Nantucko Husk was a staple, and Nantucko Husk was like strictly worse Woe Strider in a bunch of ways, and that was like best card in Rally and Standard and stuff. So yeah, we did have history on our side, I think.
Yeah, because that's and like one that you can reoccur. Why not? Definitely.
Yeah, and I think you guys should get credit for Uro and Croxa because, you know, the statement that they were obviously very good, you also applied to like Circle of Loyalty, which was a big miss. So like when you actually hit very obviously good ones, I think we need to pat ourselves on the back, right? I think, you know, I remember there's like all these cards that like look so good that just don't pan out. But in this case, Uro and Croxa went on to dominate all the formats. And then Ghost Rider, you guys also hit
the Circle of Loyalty. We just forget that we had that. I already forgot, Richard.
I already sent you a copy it signed so I can frame it. What? I just bought some like collector booster Circle of Loyalty.
One Circle of Loyalty for me and Titan's Nest for Seth.
I heard they're the next big thing in Standard. I gotta get them in before the price spikes, you know? All right. Next up from Theros Beyond Death.
This might be one of my favorite cards from the set. It might be my favorite card from the set. Nightmare Shepherd. And this card is just...
It is a demon.
Oh, it's a demon. So Crib loves it. It's kind of like a weird Panharmonicon. If you sack Enter the Battlefield trigger, it comes back. You get another... You get another copy of the Enter the Battlefield creature in token form. So I'm very hyped for this card. Kind of across archetypes. I think Aristocrats, this could be very powerful in the self-sacrifice synergy decks. I plan on playing it heavily in the Mono Black Devotion deck. I think that's one of the better cards. You can like sack your Gray Merchant and get it back in double trade. You can play it as just a good value card, and it also has some interesting combo potential, I think, as well.
Yeah. Like I think this card is... I am just a huge fan of this card. I mean, it does suck that you have to exile a creature, or else I'd be doing things like playing this and just getting a 1/1 copy of like, I don't know, Cruxer or one of the Giants or something like that. But, you know, still pretty good.
Yeah, it's still good, even with that little drawback.
Nightmare Shepherd.
in our defense, I don't feel like this is a Circle of Loyalty level with, because we definitely have seen people play Nightmare Shepherds a little bit. Is it definitely way overseeded at number 3 on our list? Yes. Should it probably be off the list altogether? Probably, but it's not like Circle of Loyalty where like no one has ever played it or something. So I think for me, I like to try to think about why I whiff on spoiler predictions to improve for the future. And I think another one of my biases is things that look like Panharmonicon. I even mentioned it in that clip. Like, oh, it's like a Panharmonicon. You double up your ETB triggers. So if it looks a little bit like Panharmonicon, I'm probably going to weight it or rate it way higher than I should.
My excuse was that it was a demon, and I immediately put it in my EDH deck. And so, it just seemed like something that was pretty sweet. It was able to like get around board wipes and stuff like that. So, you know, I thought there was value there, and maybe you could take advantage of the fact that you would get a 1/1 copy, even if you exile whatever it is. So,
and Richard.
To be fair, the first week of the new format, it was a pretty scary card, right? People were playing Mono Black Devotion. They had Woe Strider, Gray Merchant, Nightmare Shepherd. They're just draining you. It looked pretty impressive. And if you did get board wiped, you could recover. The thing is, we didn't account for people were playing Uro, right? And board wipes were useless, so no one was board wiping, right? So the metagame interactions play a big role. I do think if this was another format, Nightmare Shepherd could have been like an all-star. Like imagine going way back to like Pack Rat days or something. Maybe Nightmare Shepherd would have been, you know, a monster there. But with Uro going around and all the unfair mana and stuff happening, just it was too fair of a card to get anything done. So I don't think it's as egregious as Circle of Loyalty. I think it could still be a good card in the right formats.
Yeah, Mono Black Devotion as a whole, I think was an archetype I think I was also excited to see come back. And with Gary getting announced, all that, it kind of just felt like, okay, well, that it's got to be an archetype, right? Gary's got to be good enough. No, turns out that whole world is just wrong, right? Like they're Mono Black Devotion is nowhere near the level of what, you know, green and decks were doing. So why even try to play that fair of a Magic card?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that a big part of the problem was that we just overrated Mono Black Devotion, because if you look back on our list, Nightmare Shepherd number 3, Erebos, was number 4 right behind it, another Mono Black Devotion card. So I think we were just way too high on Mono Black Devotion, and I think you guys really hit on the reasons. Like, Nightmare Shepherd is, like, objectively a powerful Magic card, but when you consider at that time, on turn 4, people were playing Wilderness Rex and Fires of Inventions and things like that, Nightmare Shepherd is just a little bit on the fair side compared to what was actually happening with top-tier standard decks back when Theros Beyond Death was new and a big part of the format.
People were playing Wilderness Wreck on turn 4. Usually it's on turn 3. Yeah. They've accelerated a ton of mana.
Yeah. So they're untapping their lands and countering your Nightmare Shepherd. By the turn you can cast it.
Correct. That sounds right.
All right. Biggest omission, again, has to be pulled from a daily spoiler because it was just totally omitted from any top 10 list.
A new saga. Elspeth Conquers Death. The obvious comparison, I would say, is the Eldest Reborn. Eldest Reborn, lore counter 1. Opponent sacks a creature, Planeswalker. Elspeth basically lets you choose, which is nice. Yes, you can't hit a super aggressive creature, but CMC 3 or greater, that does cover a lot of the best threats in the format. Lore counter number 2, meh. Elspeth Conquers Death isn't very good. Eldest Reborn reanimates lore counter number 3, so does Elspeth Conquers Death. Oh, it's worth mentioning, Eldest Reborn reanimates creature or Planeswalker from any graveyard, while Elspeth Conquers Death only hits your graveyard. So that's something to keep in mind. You can't, like, kill your opponent's Planeswalker. I guess it wouldn't work with Elspeth Conquers Death anyway because of exiles, but you can't do the Eldest Reborn trick where you, like, kill your opponent's powerful Planeswalker with the Edict and then reanimate it a couple turns later. So I feel like this card's pretty powerful. Also has amazing art. I don't think it's quite as good as the Eldest Reborn, honestly. The removal aspect, I think, is more powerful. Second lore counter, they're both kind of not very powerful. But then the third lore counter is much more powerful, I believe, on the Eldest Reborn. Eldest Reborn, though, saw a lot of play. So even a slightly worse overall Eldest Reborn, probably still going to be good enough for at least some decks in Standard.
It's not too bad. It's not too bad.
I can't tell you how many times that second chapter has stopped me from playing. I'm just thinking back right now, listening to that. Oh, how many times could I not cast whatever follow-up spell now that you've answered my first one?
Yeah, that's the bit of analysis that stood out to me too. Like, I definitely underestimated the second lore counter and how annoying it could be. It's definitely also wrong that it's worse than Eldest Reborn. I guess maybe they overrated Eldest Reborn a little bit because Elspeth Conquers Death has proven to be much, much better. And there were times when it was maybe like the best card, one of the best cards, and not the best probably because we had some busted cards, but it was among the best cards in Standard. It's fallen back a little bit recently, but definitely a huge oversight to not have it on our top 10 list at all, especially considering, some of the other cards we've been talking about that did make the list, the Ereboses of the world and Nyx Lotuses of the world. Like, no doubt Elspeth Conquers Death probably wouldn't be top 2 because it would still be behind Uro and Kroxa, but definitely probably should have been as high as like the number 3 slot instead of not being on the list at all.
Yeah. Like, I think another thing is we didn't factor into, like, it seemed like a greedy line, but who would have known that this actually worked out? 3 fairy, bouncing it back.
Yeah, and, well,
I thought
Yarion wasn't a thing at that point, and Yarion really picked up the amount of play that the Elspeth Conquers Death saw. So we were working with incomplete information, I guess, to some extent.
All right. So next was Ikoria, which we already covered. And then following Ikoria, we had Core Set 2021. Let's see what the biggest hit was. And Ugin was in the set. And we're just going to omit Ugin because we all know how good Ugin is. So here is your biggest hit.
We have a card that I know you're not as high on, Krim, but I am really high on. Demonic Embrace. Just this 3 mana aura that, to me, it reminds me a little bit of a cross between, like Rancor, a little bit like Angelic Destiny. And both of those cards were very good whenever they were in Standard. And the reason I'm pretty high on it is twofold. One is, I think there could be a sweet black aggro style deck, like slamming this on a Rotting Regisaur, for example. And we still got like Knight of Ebon Legion. We have some good black aggro pieces. The other reason I'm hyped for it is we've seen like black-white auras be floating around on the fringes of Standard. And this seems like a really easy inclusion option for a deck like that maybe gets better with some of the new pieces coming into the format. I think the other downside is with the white-black aura deck that I didn't actually mention is it would, part of the opportunity cost is you would give up playing Loris as a companion. How much that matters post-nerfing? Less than it did before, but it still is something to keep in mind that you would give up Loris to play this as well.
Correct.
Demonic Embrace.
Seth, you really like that card. I think you had that, like, I think third or fourth on your list. Or
Yeah,
I think actually it might have been top 3.
I had it very high. I'm trying to see if I can actually pull up my list, but yeah, I had it super high on my standard list, and it ended up being decent. I think maybe I don't know. Maybe I overrated it. Is it really top 3? I don't know, but it definitely did end up being a playable card. And I'm pretty
This is our
with,
hit section, by the way, since M21 didn't see much play in standard.
I mean, I think though my analysis was pretty good. Like, 'cause people were throwing it on Rotting Regisaurs, and like that is what happened, and it did work. It's kind of faded away lately since rotation and Regisaur's gone, but I feel like it definitely needed to be on the list, and maybe it wasn't an obvious choice. So I think that was a pretty good, a little bit outside the lines or like oddball prediction that actually ended up working out in this case.
All right. And Krim
don't
was
know.
not swayed by the deep demonic aspects of the card. He did not jump on the hype bandwagon for Demonic Embrace. But yeah, the little 3-1 jumpy recursion action, especially on Regisaur, got there for a while. This was pretty meta for a while.
Was it?
Was it not?
I mean,
it saw some amount of play.
I mean, it saw play, yes, when it first came out, and then it, like, but that's just because, we're all trying new things, right? but I still feel like that card is, I mean, it's good in, like, Pioneer. I saw that in Pioneer and Mono Black Aggro, but, like,
Are we switching this to a miss then?
I'm going to defend this as a hit because I'm looking at the deck list now, and if you go back and just like search for Demonic Embrace on MTGGoldfish.com, shameless Tomer style plug in the middle of a video. If you go back and search though, there were a lot of mono black lists between like August and September. Like it was kind of a real thing. Yes, it only lasted for like a month and it hasn't really seen play since rotation. But I think that it counts as a hit. I'm going to argue that it counts as a hit based on the amount of play that it did see before rotation.
I don't know if we'll count it a hit. How about we call it a bunt? All right.
Okay.
A bunt is very crucial, okay? It does its job.
I will accept a bunt, yes.
All right. Next clip.
Spark Hunter Masticore, our new Planeswalker sniper. And what do you think about this one, Krim?
I think it lives up to its name. So this will kill Planeswalkers, and when we've got a lot of 3-mana Planeswalkers that need to be dealt with, I'm kind of liking this. New Teferi, like all those things. Like this card, it even survives new Ugin.
That is true. It is the ultimate foil to Ugins, which we're in a very Planeswalker heavy standard. We still have War of the Spark for a few more months. We have Teferis and Nissas. We have a lot of really good Planeswalkers. We have more good Planeswalkers coming with Core Set 2021 itself, and this feels like a really good answer because it's not narrow. I'm pretty high in this card as well. I don't think that discarding a card is a huge downside, and if you're discarding like a Kroxa or an Uro, maybe it's even an upside sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's tons of targets that you're willing to throw away from your hand.
I think the only drawback I would say is Brazen Borrower does line up pretty well with it, and Elspeth Conquers Death is a way to answer it through Indestructible, so there is drawbacks, but even with that in mind, there's so many Planeswalkers running around that I think that Spark Hunter Masticore definitely has a place in the format.
Our savior, Spark Hunter Masticore. Nissa got you down. Spark Hunter Masticore. Teferi give you troubles. Spark Hunter Masticore.
In our defense, War of the Spark was in the format. There were many Planeswalkers, although I guess the bad news is, even before War of the Spark rotated, no one ever played Spark Hunter.
I remember this card.
I played it.
Oh, did you play it in your main decks, Krim? I remember you having it in your sideboards. Were you glad that you played it, or did it quickly leave the deck?
No, because every time I played it, it would just get blocked by all of Nissa's lands.
Yep. I remember I tried this in my decks. This is the most useless card ever because you 2-for-1 yourself when they have any removal. It doesn't have haste, so it can't even kill anything quickly enough. And it was just bad. Even when you're facing a deck full of Planeswalkers, you're like, I'd rather have literally any other card than this Spark Hunter Masticore.
I think we might have overestimated how many 1 mana to ping a Planeswalker activation it takes to kill something like an Ugin. We're like, hey, it's an Ugin answer. We're like, no, seriously, like, you gotta spend 8 mana to try to ping it down. Like, really? What were we thinking at the time?
Honestly, yeah, I don't know. Because it got blocked by everything.
We believed in WotC. We thought this was the answer to the Planeswalker heavy, meta, and that Wizards actually gave us an answer, but it was just troll.
It was a lie.
It did nothing.
It was a lie.
All right, next up.
Village Rites is definitely powerful. 1 mana instant speed, sack a creature, draw 2 cards. That's about as cheap and as instant as this effect can get. It'll be interesting. Traditionally, this effect hasn't seen staple level play, but if you're playing a sacrifice style deck, a 1 mana cantrip to draw 2 does seem pretty powerful.
All right, daily spoiler because it was omitted from your top 10 list of Village Rites.
So I gotta ask you, Crib. So we both left Village Rites off our list, and Village Rites has proven itself to be great in Standard, good in other formats. Do you think that its rarity played into that at all? I've noticed when I tend to put together my top 10 list, I look at the whole set, but it's much easier for me to gloss over commons than it is for like rares or mythics that I spend a lot of time really like thinking about trying to figure out. Do you think that the fact that this was a common led to it not being on our list, or do we just like straight up whiff for another reason?
I don't know about why it wasn't on your list, but for me, I don't think that just because it's rarity, it's left off my list because there's tons of powerful commons. I think I just chose to not put it on the list because first off, it feels like one of those effects where I don't know if now when I think about it and how ridiculous this sounds, I just don't think it was good because I think I'm used to the whole anything with as an additional cost, right? That we're talking like the past as an additional cost, sack a creature, draw X amount of cards, right? Those commons and uncommon spells that we had. Like, what is it? The altar? I can't remember.
Altar's Reap, I think, is
Altar's
the 2 mana
Reap.
one.
Yeah, the 2 mana one. But it being 1 mana was all the difference. So I just kind of felt like with the way history played out, with a lot of these effects, I just didn't care too much about it. And it just didn't seem to make that big of a, maybe it wasn't flashy, right? I think that was another thing that factored into it. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't like the rest of 2019 forward. It didn't do 19 things at once. It only drew 2 cards. I think that's a huge part of it for me, at least. But rarity does not have does not factor into it at all because there are tons of powerful commons.
Yeah, I think for me, it's easier for me, I think, to miss a common than a rare or a mythic. But I do think this is an especially bad pick for us because of where the meta was at the time. Like, Lurrus was a pretty big thing. Sacrifice was a pretty big thing. So there were even, like, obvious homes for this. You already were Cauldron Familiaring. Like, this seems like a really obvious card to play in a Cauldron Familiar deck. So I feel like we probably should have figured this one out just based on the meta and its mana cost. So I feel like this is actually, it's not Circle of Loyalty, but I feel like it was actually a pretty bad pick to leave out, or a pretty bad omission.
It'll never be as powerful as Circle.
Nothing will.
I legitimately still stand by, like, knowing what I know now, right? I think I still understand my reasoning behind it, only because it just didn't feel like it did enough, which, coming from the format that we were used to, legitimately, there were so many things that did 9 things at once, right? There was Narset everywhere. So I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, obviously knowing what I know now, yeah. All right. I'd put that in. I don't know how we didn't figure that it would go into the sack list. Maybe because also at that time, sack lists felt like they were at the brim of what it can put in the deck. If this was going in the deck, it was maybe as a 1 or 2 of. Because the list felt so tight, right? Like there was no room to add new cards.
Yeah, and I guess on the other side, you do bring up a good point. Like, when this came out, Teferi was still a card, so it shuts down, like, the instant speed sack in response to removal, or sack my Kroxa with the trigger on the stack.
Right.
And Narset was in the deck, or in the format, so that would shut down the card draw altogether. So even though, like, sack was a thing, I can see, looking at it from the opposite perspective, there were some really powerful cards that just, like, were everywhere and kind of accidentally hosed this card at the time. So maybe that's part of why we left it off the list, although
Right.
I still think we probably should have gave it more credit.
Yeah, definitely should have given it more credit, but I think from also the times that I played against it, right? I mean, I had Narsets and all these things out, and it just didn't feel like it mattered.
Yes.
So-
Grim has his stacks planeswalkers, so he's not scared of little draw 2 at instant speed.
Teferi,
He's holding his
Narset,
counter
okay.
spell for Spark Hunter Masticore. We know what he's doing.
Okay, the Masticore was not in the deck. I tried. I sure as heck tried. That was not good. It was very bad. It was very bad. You know,
All
it wasn't
right.
a circle of loyalty, but it was bad.
Now we go to present day. Zendikar Rising. Zendikar Rising brought Big Daddy Omnath, and here's what we
This
had to
is
say.
one that I'm super high on. Krim, I don't think you had this on your list at all. I think this might be the card that we have the most differing opinion on. Omnath, Locust of Creation. So, Omnath, my argument for Omnath being good is Omnath, it's a 4-mana 4/4, so you got good stats. It hits the mark on doing something right away with the enter the battlefield draw card triggers. And then gaining 4 life, that's not really game breaking, but it is definitely nice, especially against aggro. It'll swing the race in your favor, and theoretically you're going to be gaining that 4 life presumably every turn, as long as you're hitting a land drop. The adding a mana ability allows for some crazy explosive plays. And then the removal option is pretty strong as well. Like, if you get 3 land drops, you're hitting your opponent for 4 direct damage to close out the game. So my only concern with this card is the mana cost. Like, every other thing about this card does something when it comes into play. It can take over the game if it sticks out, but it is 4 colors of mana. Is that going to be a deal breaker in our upcoming standard with Shocklands rotating? I'm betting that it's not, but if it does fail, I think it's going to be because of the mana cost. I'm hopeful that there will be decks that can overcome it and make Omnath very good, but we'll find out in a couple of weeks once Zendikar Rising is actually seeing play.
Seth is hopeful that Omnath sees some play in Standard. I remember this card during the podcast, and I was really negative on it. I'm like, how can you cast this? 4 different colored mana? That seems impossible. Seems like the people at Wizards thinks like us too. 4 different colored mana, not a thing, especially when you have Lotus Cobra in the format. And Cultivate and other such cards, very easy to accomplish. And Seth's wish came true. The monkey's paw curled.
Way to go, Seth. Way to go.
I wish I was wrong on this one, honestly. Like, I wish that it just didn't see play. That would have been much better for the game overall, I think.
I'm right there, right? I mean, the card was good, right? The card was very good if you could cast it. And that was my big thing. I mean, I just couldn't see a world where you could cast it. If, sure, there was Lotus Cobra, but let's say the Lotus Cobra died, right? In that situation, hypothetically, Omnath player would be stuck and not able to do anything. Not true. Even without it, they could still get the mana, and cast it. And if it weren't for the mana cost, it would have been on my list. But because of its 4 colors, without Shocklands, I just could not see a world with it.
I was going to say that, like, in Krim's defense, we didn't get to hear much from him in the clip that we listened to, but I definitely remember that your concern was not, like, Omnath being bad. Like, you knew it was good, and you thought it was good, but your concern was purely based on mana. So I think that's where our disagreement was with this card, was not so much, like, the card itself, but I guess I had more hope that the standard mana base would be good enough to support it, and you were more skeptical in the standard mana base. So, yes, it wasn't on your list, but I think it wasn't you just whiffing on Omnath and being like, oh, this card isn't good. It was more like, I don't know if standard's mana is going to be good enough.
Yeah. I mean, that is still like, I'm surprised. It still shocks me a little bit to this day that 4 colors was possible when I couldn't even get a 3-color deck to work, right? Granted that the missing ingredient, the missing ingredient was green, but yeah, if I should have known with the history of how, green had been doing and like all of that. Yeah. Okay, sure.
To be fair, these breaking cards are like, there's a obscure condition, and we don't think you can hit it, but if you do hit it, the card is broken, i.e. companions, Omnath, things like that. Turns out Magic players are very good at getting around these so-called restrictions that Wizards puts on the cards, such that they're meaningless, right? Delve, dredge, like all that stuff, right? People just get around the downside of the card and just get only upside. All right, next up from Zendikar Rising.
The number 8 on our list. Oh, I really like this card. Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats. And I've generally been skeptical of party cards, but Zagras is a card that I'm actually pretty hyped about because I don't think you really need many party members for this to be good. What do you think about this 6 mana 4/4 flyer, Grim?
Just like you said, if you get to cast this for 5, that's already good, right? If you ever have more than one creature in your party, then anything under 5 mana, this is a steal.
Yeah, that's why I really like this card. I'm actually pretty scared of this card and expect it to be pretty good.
Yeah, it's going to be picking off tons of planeswalkers.
Okay. I see how you made the mistake. You saw Thief of, and then your mind just put in Oko and Crown, and you're like, this has to be good.
Yeah, we'll go with that. I'll go with that, yeah.
Really though, I think this might be one where we get bailed out. Like, Zendikar Rising isn't that old. We know we're getting the D&D set that'll probably have more party tribe members. So I think there's still hope for Zagras, but I think looking at it right now, where we're at the end of the year, before we get more sets and the rest of Standard, I mean, it hasn't really done anything. And even though we were skeptical of party, we liked Zagras for some reason, even though apparently I couldn't say Zagras at the time. Another one of those cases. But I don't know. Where do we go wrong with this one, Krim? Like, what was our issue with this pick? Because I still, when I read Zagras and hear that analysis, I still actually feel the same way. Like, it should be a good card if you can cast it for 4 or 5 mana. Why isn't it?
Well, okay, I wouldn't say that it's just written off right away right now, right? Because, I mean, there's still a chance, like you had mentioned. But why hasn't it gotten any play? I mean, let's be honest here. It's too fair. It's too fair. Like, it's even let's say it didn't cost 6 mana. It was 5 mana with party, then maybe finally, but I don't know. It feels like it doesn't do enough. Like, this isn't a planeswalker dominant like format like we thought it would be, right? I think we came from a world with War of the Spark and all this, so you kind of just expected there to be planeswalkers left and right. But when you actually think about what planeswalkers are being played right now, none. Not like Vivian, maybe, and then a little bit of Ashcock here and there. Like that's about it though, right? I mean, of course, there's the big decks that are just like playing like Ugins and whatnot, but there just aren't that many planeswalkers.
Yeah, Zagras doesn't, just doesn't line up with the meta the way that I was picturing it. And it might be a little bit of PTSD from War of the Spark and just being used to the opponents always having like 3, ridiculous planeswalkers on the battlefield every single game. So I think that does definitely hurt it. I think it's also that party ended up being as bad as we thought it was going to be. Like, I remember, I think we were both like, party just does not feel like a constructed playable mechanic. And the first 3 months of Zendikar Rising Standard have pretty much borne out party not being a constructed playable mechanic. Like, I don't think I've seen hardly any actual successful party decks in Standard. Like, period, none, even though that was one of the big themes of Zendikar Rising.
You know what? We'll revisit that because I still think with Zendikar's life and the, still being here for a while, and on top of that, we have the D&D set. I think the D&D set will definitely make or break party.
Yeah, I still think it has potential.
These fair cards are often like really big misses when we go like through basically all the previous seasons because they're fair. Like they're not good enough that you would warp a deck to build around. So you have to have a good fair deck in those colors to begin with, and then this card would go in there. And oftentimes those colors are not good enough. And then that's considering the fact that sometimes the unfair decks are just so much better that you don't want to play a fair deck whatsoever. So, I mean, even if Zagras was just like a 4 mana 4/4, I don't know how much play it would see. Like, even without any restrictions, like it would still be questionable, or like a fringe include. Maybe it'll see questing beast level or something, right? But like, you just don't want to warp your deck to play fair cards. Like, if you have a fair deck and this fits, fine, but you don't throw everything away like you would for to warp your deck around, like, say, Oko or Omnath or things like that. That is actually a legit win condition and worth sacrificing the rest of your deck for.
No, I think that's a really good point, because the other issue is the colors just don't really line up with anything. I'm looking at like successful standard decks on the metagame page, and there's no sort of like Rakdos mid-range, Jund mid-range, like those decks just don't exist. The only Rakdos decks that even like kind of have had success recently are like really aggressive lure style sacrifice decks for the most part. That's just like all really cheap creatures. So I think that it's also just like there's no home. Not only is there not a home for the party deck or in a party deck, because that doesn't exist. It's not like there's even just some random mid-range deck you can slot this into as a good threat, because those colors don't really support mid-range in our current standard.
Yeah, like, I mean, the colors just don't line up at all, and it's kind of wild. But once again, I'm still hopeful that party, as for as much of a meme as it is now. I mean, remember, Explore was kind of a meme too, right?
Yeah, I kind of feel like party is a plant for the future.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of feel like the idea wasn't for it to be competitive with Zendikar Rising, but the idea was to, like, lay the foundation for some of these tribes, and then as we get Kaldheim and Strixhaven, and then eventually the D&D set, by the time we get to that, then I would not be even a little bit surprised to see a competitive party deck in Standard. And who knows, maybe Zagras is part of it. Maybe we're all like sick of 2-mana Zagrases next summer after we get the D&D set. That doesn't seem, is it likely? No, but is it possible? I think so.
Okay, I'll set myself up for next year's review. There's no way Zagras will see play. Like, they have to print like a 2-mana creature that effectively fills your party, and then that creature has to be Rakdos somehow, and then maybe you would see a Zagras play. Like,
You just wait, Richard. You just wait. We're gonna have.
You need to have like 2 or 3 creatures on the battlefield. Why are you playing a 4th one, right? Like, what are you doing? You're just overextending to die, right? So it's just inherently
collected company
limited.
and Standard. You just wait. And then also that's really bad with the Zagras, but whatever.
Would you say we're tripping?
Yes. I will go on the record and say you're tripping.
Now it's for sure going to be a good mechanic.
Clip it. No more Zagras. Like, tomorrow, Zagras breaks the open. Like, what? Come on, guys. All right. Last emission. This one, I don't even know what is this card?
We also got a creature land and Crawling Barrens. So the other thing I like about this card is it starts off slow. It's only a 2/2 the first time you activate it, which is not very exciting. However, it does grow very quickly. The second time it's a 4/4, the third time it's a 6/6, and then you're already on par with Raging Ravine, and then it gets better from there, and it's important to note, you can activate it multiple times in a turn. I think this is a pretty solid creature land for standard decks that can play it. I don't think it's going to show up too much in older formats, just because 4 is a lot to activate, and starting off with only 2 counters is a little risky, does die to a lot of removal, but a potentially powerful creature land, as we've seen with Mobilized District, which has been a very good card at various times. You give up the upside of getting cheaper if you have a bunch of legends on the battlefield, but you gain the upside of Crawling Barrens becoming an even bigger, scarier threat if you can activate it a few times. So definitely a solid creature land coming soon in Zendikar Rising.
I love this card, and I think it's better than Mobilized District by a landslide.
And in defense of Crim, it was number 10 on your personal list. It was one of the cards that got cut from our combined list, but you did recognize the power of Crawling Barrens.
It even won me tournament.
Spoiler season.
It even won me the tournament because it's so good, right? I think that land is still underrated. If you can play it and you're not like Gruul or something like that, I think it's solid, right? The removal that most people would play would be like Heartless Act. Hard to line up with. So, and Eliminate, there's just not enough. I mean, you can play Eliminate. It's good against rogues now, right? But like at the time, I just mostly saw Heartless Axe and a bunch of sorcery speed stuff. Because I had assumed that Bloodchief's Thirst was going to go off, and that was, and I mean, it did, right off the bat. And all of that, and just this got around everything.
Yeah, I think I think that you were actually on top of this one. The most interesting part of this being our biggest omission of Zendikar Rising is Crawling Barrens, even though, as Krim was saying, it might still be underrated, it's definitely not like breaking standard or anything, or like a super heavily played card. It is a played card, but it kind of speaks to how little of an impact Zendikar Rising has had, that this is like our biggest omission from the entire set. Unlike a lot of the cards we've been talking about, where we were like, oh, companions. Yeah, those are horrible. Like, Zendikar Rising just hasn't made that huge of an impact on standard, so there's not really a ton of great omissions or things that we actually missed out on from Zendikar Rising. There's still time, definitely, because Zendikar Rising's the newest set, and we still have a lot of standard to go with Zendikar Rising in it. But at this point, I feel like Zendikar Rising is one of the sets that we probably did best on, as far as not having like a major omission of like a bannably good broken card, and not naming like a Circle of Loyalty type card is one of our best cards. So I think we did good on Zendikar Rising.
I guess also my love for rogues came through properly here, because I mean, rogues, it took a few bannings, but we're there. We're there. Rogues are now a tier 1 deck.
Yeah, you were right on rogues. One that we did whiff on that could have been our biggest miss, but kind of boring to talk about, is a Soul Shatter. That's a card that was on our top 10 list that we thought, like, the Edict for the biggest thing, that's probably going to be good. But that one hasn't worked out yet. Although that's another one where
well, you say that now, but you know how many people like I'd play on the ladder on the first week or two that had that huge behemoth thing that was uncounterable? They thought they had me.
Ooh.
No, I always come ready for that nonsense. Missed me with that nonsense.
And that's what I was going to say, though. We're still got a lot more cards coming in standard. So that's another one that, yes, it looks bad now that was one of our top 5 cards. But that's another one where, you know, the right card gets printed in a future set, and that could still be a legitimate, like, standard removal spell at some point.
Yeah, it's definitely still worth. It's still worth. I mean, it could be a lot better, obviously, but you know, like you had mentioned, there's just got to be 1 or 2 more cards to get printed, and then we're back at it, right? I mean, right now we aren't at a need for a ton of things that hit planeswalkers, right? So because of that, it's easy to just play cheaper and more, I don't know, targeted removal towards creatures.
Yeah, I mean, I heard there was a rumor that we're getting Carnage Tyrant reprint in Helheim.
You know,
so once that happens,
that is not very
is gonna be
metal or Viking.
He's gonna have a helmet this time. He's got a helmet with the horns,
a helmet
just
and a little
indestructible
mace
now,
and a beard.
Yeah, there it is.
All right, so those are, I guess, that's a summary of our predictions for the last year of Standard. So keep those in mind as you're listening to us evaluate cards for Kaldheim. We may be a little high on artifacts that pump knights. We may be a little high on Masticores that slay planeswalkers, but you know, we did get the big hits. We got the Okos, we got the Omnaths, we got the Uros. So yeah, I mean, it's not bad. I think we're doing above average. I think if I were to rate us, I'd give us a B.
I think that's a fair grade. I would probably go with somewhere in the like B range to B minus, somewhere in there. I think overall, I think we do a pretty good job at evaluating powerful cards, but evaluating spoilers is a super inexact science, especially in Magic, because you don't know what's coming in the next set. So you never know when a card that doesn't look like it'll do much of anything during spoiler season all of a sudden ends up being really good. And plus, in the modern era of Magic, we have the added confusion of constant banning. So you never know when a card's going to be too good and end up getting banned, and then your prediction ends up failing for that reason as well. So I think overall, Krim, I think we had a pretty good year with our top 10 predictions. Obviously, we had some big misses, but I think overall we did pretty well.
I would say we have a B, and then I think about Circle of Loyalty, and I want to just give us an F. but
there's still time, Krim. Just go brew up a circle. You can change the future.
I can break it.
I can break it. Time.
I do think though, like when it comes to evaluating too, and why we are higher on some cards, let's just say like in this case, Titan's Nest, is because of, you know, the way the game like, you know, we're used to a little bit of the older Magic cards too. And in old Magics, a lot of these things that are really good to us are just not that good anymore, right? Like, I mean, like, they're too fair. Things are, you know what I mean? If a lot of these cards that we have rated on here are just good because of, you know, it would be good in like 2012. It'd be a house in 2012, right? Terror of the Peaks, a monster. Absolutely terrifying in 2012. Elder Gargaroth, sure, but like by 2020 standards, these are just okay cards. These are just fair.
I think that's actually a really good point too, that I think we're also like catching up with the changes in Magic design, just like everyone else is.
Right.
And it is really easy to judge a card based on the past, 15 years of Magic or 10 years of Magic, when really design has changed so much in just the last couple of years that maybe we got to throw out some of those historical precedents, because a card being good enough to be really good back in 2015 or 2010, I don't know if that means anything in 2020, honestly, in 2021, where we're at now, because the game has just changed so much and cards have gotten so much more powerful in the last couple of years.
Yeah. And like, that's the big thing here. And I mean, now the issue here is I'm afraid to get accustomed to card design and then start looking at newer cards and think, well, this doesn't do enough. So then every set feels like Ixalan.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of episode 309 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. So, Richard Grip, thanks for hanging out and doing this during the holiday season. Richard, thanks for hosting. That was super fun. Thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks to Card Conduit for supporting the show this week. So we will be back next week for the first cast of 2021 to talk about whatever goes down in the world of Magic. So until then, everyone, have a great week, have a happy holidays, and we'll talk to you soon.